Believe it or not, it's been 10 years since the word Siri was first introduced in the context of using an iPhone. Since then, the way we use technology in our lives and our homes, of course, and our workplaces has fundamentally changed. Someone who is not fundamentally changed in all of that time is Scott Fulton, who has been a technology journalist who we love dearly and an editor since 1984. And today, Scott joins us to gauge just how much our lives have changed in ways that we don't often stop to measure. What do you think, Scott?
What I think, first of all, I want to give all of our viewers my best wishes for a very blessed holiday for everyone and for true peace on earth. We talk a lot about the issues that divide us, and even in technology, there are divisive issues. This season is about issues that bring us together. And I want to give my love and best wishes for everyone out there, especially those who are facing the very difficult issues. My friends will know who I'm speaking of. Folks who are dealing with cancer, folks who are survivors, folks who have battled back from the worst parts of their lives. And it was with that I was inspired to do a kind of a 10-year retrospective. You get lots of chances at the end of the year to say, okay, here's where we've come in the last year. You don't get too many chances. I've had a few to talk about what's happened in our lives in the last 10 years. At about 10 years ago, at about this time, a small company was putting together an application for the iPhone. It was an interesting way, kind of an alternative method for getting what you want out of a service. And they called their idea Siri. If you think that Siri was entirely created at Apple, no, it wasn't. It was started outside of Apple in the iPhone/iOS ecosystem. And this is a frame from that late 2009, early 2010 first demo of the Siri app. And this is kind of a guidepost for me for how far we've come and where things have changed for us. Because the iPhone itself isn't all that different from what it used to be. It doesn't have the slick chrome on the outside. It may be cooler in certain respects, but for all intents and purposes, okay, yeah, it lacks the little thumb button now. But for all intents and purposes, it's still really the iPhone. And a lot of people have grown up and accustomed to Siri. But at the time this app was introduced, we didn't have an answer to the question, how would we control devices, control applications, control services with our voice? And we were wondering how we were going to get all that type of control into something as small as a telephone. Well, the answer ended up being kind of right in front of our faces, or maybe just behind them. It was to put all the smarts of things like this in big servers that had the processing power to detect what your voice pattern was and to look at all the semantics and to take a pretty good guess as to what you mean by things. And this was the Siri model, putting a powerful server behind a fairly simple app that all it did was gather a recording and send it to the server, and then gather a recording from the server and send it back to you. So this was a powerful idea. A number of fundamental big changes in the way we live and work had to take place between this particular period of time and today, where you can just go on a phone and say, hey Siri, or hey Google, or hey Alexa, find me the current weather report. And that kind of brings me to let's go a little further down. This is one of those situations where I'll fix this in post. We're going through a whirlwind of slides until we find the next one that I was looking for, and they were supposed to be in order. Here he is. This is a fellow named Solomon Hykes. Solomon is still not kind of a widely known fellow. But he had an idea of doing something in a Steve Jobs kind of way. And by means of a demo like this was one of them that he did in 2013, he came up with a method for taking a small workload, a piece of code, and without wrapping that into this massive virtual machine that the cloud would require, deploy that workload in a cloud. At the time that his company is on his shirt there is .cloud. Deploy that workload in the cloud in a way that that it could be instantly usable, and it could also be instantly changeable. And those demos were impressive. And then people went home and then they looked at the demos on YouTube again and said, wait a minute, this is more impressive than I realized, because there's a number of things he's talking about. You could do an app like Siri, and instead of changing it every 18 months to make it better, you could change it every week. You could change it every day. You could improve it very, very gradually. And the system for which that improvement was made is called Docker. This guy came up with it. And it wasn't clear at first, but it was clear within about 8 to 12 months that what this guy had in his back pocket was indeed nuclear. Docker changed a lot of things about the way we live and work. You looking at me right now in this video is actually one way things have changed. There's no blocky stuff. The audio is clearer than it used to be. Your capability of selecting the video, turning me off and going to something else is much faster than it used to be. Because of this guy, he started stuff. And going back through my carousel, I'm going to find the slide of the other guy who took the Docker method and ran with it and effectively changed the world we live in. That's this fellow. His name is Adrian Cockcroft. And history will absolutely record the changes that he made, because the architecture that he came up with, that he showed at Solomon Hike's Docker convention here in 2015, was the microservices architecture used by Netflix, which accounts for 3/4 of all the world's web traffic. Our capability of streaming, our way of choosing the videos we want to see, and how that streaming service sends pieces of videos to hundreds of thousands of worldwide users through Amazon's cloud simultaneously. This is the guy who instigated it at the architecture and put together the team that came up with it. He's now working at Amazon, naturally, where he is one of their chiefs of architecture and engineering. This methodology, this type of streaming communication, is as important an invention for the world as was television in the 1920s and 30s, as was wireless radio at the turn of the century and up until the time of the Titanic sank. The fellow who helped bring about those two changes in history was a fellow named David Sarnoff, a radio engineer who worked at Marconi, who later became the head of the Radio Corporation of America. That's how important David Sarnoff became. He brought us and gave us RCA, which made NBC possible, which made network radio possible, which made network television. This guy, Adrian Cockcroft, did something exactly at least as important. He gave us a method for server-driven, microservices-driven streaming that was not possible before. And that changed, was probably responsible for one of the greatest changes in the way we deal with technology so far in the 21st century.
Yeah, so very significant, Scott. And I know, or I could see, I should say, how these particular events changed you in the work that you do. And you're the infrastructure guy. You like data centers and server closets, as we've talked about before. So how do these things that you're talking about actually, do you think, affect other human beings?
Yeah, Art Carney, back when he was the #2 guy on a show called The Honeymooners, that was also known as the Jackie Gleason Show. He had a popular song in the 1950s. We sing the song of the sewer we sing this song. And I think of that every time people talk about me as the back end guy, the guy who likes the back closets, the server rooms, You know, together we stand with shovel in hand to keep things rolling along. There's a song for you and your kids to sing this holiday season. Your question was, how does this change ordinary, regular things? How does this change the way people work? And the answer to that has to do with discs. Remember discs? Discs were the way we were going to receive our video. From now on, we were going to have these highly compressed, high resolution blue laser discs. And a lot of people have these $50 Blu-ray players in their home, and certainly I do. And people are using them less and less and less for the reasons I described, having to do with streaming video and the new way that video is being delivered to us. But remember all those years where we covered the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas every January. And in 2008, 2009, 2010, we talked about the format wars. Who was going to be the format that succeeded in the media delivery market? And that was a war that was fought for several years between Blu-ray, which was what was being demonstrated here, and HD DVD, which is something we don't hear about anymore. This is the format that lost. And it lost not because it was technologically inferior, but because there were a lot of politics involved in terms of which movie studios were funding the production of the machines that would play the discs that would bring the movies into our homes and offices. This was a big deal. And I spent sleepless nights for years covering the intimate details of those disc formats and how consumers would be changed by whichever format won the format war. Well, let's be honest, even though Blu-ray officially won that war, there were no spoils, because by the time Blu-ray settled in, streaming was becoming a realistic thing. The Adrian Cockcroft method of microservices was starting to take hold. Netflix was becoming a possibility, and soon Amazon Prime followed with a model that was very, very similar. And now we have a streaming environment that's made possible not by these little things that we hold in our hand, but something a lot more like this, remotes that can help us decide or even talk to them by using voice. Remember what I said about Siri. They can help us decide what's out there. What do we want to see today? Which season of Star Trek Discovery on CBS All Access non-paid promotion do I want to see now? These are things that happened because of what was going on underneath. This was stuff that was happening on the surface. This was a surface factor that, well, it died. Let's be honest about it. Surface factors like what our phone looks like, how big they are. I've got a relatively big one. It's a Samsung Galaxy Note 9. And these little changes that happen to our phones, it doesn't matter. It's a kind of a triviality. Here's something else I spent a lot of my time with covering in the last 10 years that ended up being a kind of a trivial factor. Web browsers. Does it matter to you which web browser you use on your phone, on your desktop PC? Do you still use a desktop PC? Do you use it on a tablet? Well, I used to be in the business of gauging the performance of the relative browsers in the market. This is from 2010. This is a late 2010 chart of all the competitive Windows-based browsers in the market. And when somebody created a change in the browser that made it work just a little bit faster than it did before, their numbers on the chart would scoot to the right. I'd produce a headline and a whole bunch, tens of thousands of readers, literally. And I talk about my dozens of fans, but we're talking about pretty big numbers. We had a lot of people following the browser wars. And who's going to have the fastest browser? And when Opera, remember Opera was the fastest browser you could not buy, that could just install. That was a huge story for years and years. Where is it now? It's inconsequential. The world has moved on because it's more important to be able to pick up our device, say what we want, and just have it tell us what it needs, and to leave all of that stuff in the background to engineers. So, and this is the important thing. When things get more dull as a talking point, when it matters less and less about the formats of things, it starts to matter more and more how those things are delivered to you. And my end of the story matters more and more as a result. That's why when I come up and tell people, here's what's interesting in the infrastructure and here's why it's important for the reason that it won't be important to you in 3 or 4 years' time.
And interesting to look back in perspective there, Scott. We appreciate you walking us through that too. That was really really interesting, and the entertainment value good. The singing, we didn't expect to get that from you today, and we did. So
it's Christmas. I'm a caroler. What can you say?
Well, we appreciate it as always. I know you do a lot of great writing for ZDNet and certainly have so much experience to share with us. So we appreciate that and really do look forward to 2020 and covering lots of great technology going forward.
Happy holidays to you, Karen, and happy holidays, everyone. Thank you very, very much.
Sounds good. Thank you, Scott. Thanks for watching, everybody.